So today is the 26th of June 2015, and we're in the beautiful foothills of the Himalayas next to Machkali at the Foundation for the Contemplation of Nature. And so we're meeting Ajay Rastogi, who is its founder and also director. So namaste, Ajay.
Namaste, Christoph.
So you had a very interesting journey in relationship to nature and the environment. You've been interested or inspired by nature since your childhood. And this has led you to study agricultural and environmental sciences. And after completing your studies, you started first working with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and then continued on similar assignments, first with the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, which is actually working in 8 Himalayan countries. And after this, you started to become already independent, working for the certification of organic and fair trade certification with the FLO, the Fair Trade Labeling Organization. So you were working more in the South Asia region. And then this led you to work for FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, where you continue to coordinate programs on the National Organic Agricultural Program. And then it was around 2007, you decided to kind of quit that and to re-explore, put into a different perspective what you have been doing. And you got a European Union fellowship, like a Erasmus, in the framework of the Erasmus Mundus program. And you studied applied ethics in Netherlands and Norway. And there apparently you discovered this whole idea of aesthetic appreciation, which started to link in a more explicit way your interest for nature and the environment with also this idea of contemplation of nature as a very important, maybe ethical thing, which you will explain to us a little more. And so the idea started to germinate, to organize some workshops on this theme, which you started around 2008, and which little by little then led to the establishment of this foundation for the contemplation of nature. Before this, you had also the opportunity to go to the United States at University of Washington in Seattle to deepen. It was on a Fulbright leadership award that you went there, and to open up your path from the aesthetics to the scientific, I would say, side, and the whole new pathways in science which are open up, like in the neuroscience field, on what contemplation of nature, contact with nature, link with nature could bring. So, as we see, there was a kind of red thread, like in your whole journey. So, could you tell us a little, how these things little by little unfolded? Like from your initial idea, like wanting to work in the environmental field, how did this lead you to discover different jobs and then leaving all these jobs to finally start your own approach to these questions?
Thank you, Christoph, and I'm very honored that you are here and asking me these questions. See, I've thankfully, means my parents and particularly my father, he always encouraged us to explore. And when we were kids, we lived in a rural area, primarily in agricultural countryside. And then my parents sent me to a boarding school, which was in the hills, in the same hills that I live now, and amidst nature. Somehow, that time, I think I used to miss home and my mom much more as compared to the natural surroundings, and they could never compensate for that love. But as I grew up and took up this agricultural education and education in the field of environmental sciences, my job led me to far away, the location in India, which is in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. It is on the tri-junction of the Myanmar on the east, and Tibet, China on the north, and Bangladesh on the south. And there I saw how beautiful was agriculture. Somehow, during the course of education, you tend to feel that it's only the production side which is so significant. And it's like any other occupation. But when you see how those farmers are working, it seems like they are flowing with the forces of nature. And if, if you go deeper into the scientific aspects, it is fascinating how much science is there in those traditions and customs which apparently look uh, like not so uh, not so much on the surface of it. Then little by little I had to unlearn all the 5 years of university education to be able to really appreciate the way people did it. This is not to undermine the scientific side, because I think it was because of that upbringing that I could see the science in the practices of agriculture that the farmers were doing, and the integration, the ecosystem services that they were naturally harnessing, and so on and so forth. So I think I was very fortunate, and we very deeply tried to understand. My wife, who was a lawyer, she was very much interested in the customary law and governance. So what was even more interesting for a person who comes from scientific background is to have this complementarity of someone who is trying to understand the institutional side of how the traditional society govern themselves, what are the norms and rules of customary laws that relate to agriculture, natural resources management. And I think that really gave us a very comprehensive insight. Now, with that, gradually, so from a very narrowly confined aspect of looking at agriculture from just a production point of view, we start to see the landscape in agriculture and how human beings shape landscapes and how those landscapes are integrated in the ecosystem. So with this, I further moved on to a UNESCO supported program which worked in the 8 Himalayan countries, and it was on applied ethnobotany. And the idea was that how this indigenous knowledge can be applied in natural resource management settings. So there were 8 participating countries. We did case studies in all the 8, and we did workshops in the 5 countries. In 5 countries we did workshops, because some countries were really very difficult, like Afghanistan and Myanmar, for example. That time it so happened that it was not possible. Now, what I think I felt in that setting, because it was like an intergovernmental organization which worked at a macro level. And so I felt that because I was the youngest international staff in that organization, I felt it was a bit early for me to be just dealing with a lot of senior bureaucrats and technocrats in the countries concerned, and there was still time to remain connected to the grassroots. So we returned, and then we continued to work in the field of interface between the livelihoods of the people. And organic agriculture was just beginning. India hadn't yet come about with the legislation, and we were very keen that somehow organic should not be seen as divorced from traditional agriculture. What happens is that when we start to package it in the modern scientific way, under the paradigm of sustainable agriculture, and because there is ill effects of pesticides and chemicals, you think that we should do organic agriculture. Yes, we should, but that's not the whole of it. And therefore, some of us were very keen, so I was a part of a small network where we were thinking that how traditional knowledge could steer the organic agriculture movement in the country rather than the substituting it from very sectoral inputs. And little by little, then of course, if you see the condition of the small farmers worldwide, then they often don't get the value of their produce, the value of labor that they put. So, especially geared towards small farmers, there's one particular certification and labeling. It wasn't the certification when I began. This flow was just beginning in India. And we said we will label as fair trade. And so I worked for almost 8 years in trying to assist fair trade labeling organization in Germany, based in Bonn, in trying to develop the standards initially for India, and also which were very much on a global pattern, but we had agriculture, so there's a lot of culture involved in agriculture, and so if you only remain confined within the European agriculture, from where your fair trade standards are coming from the consumers and producers, then you often tend to undermine the cultural settings in countries like ours. So it was very fascinating. Every 2 years we used to meet from world over, wherever there were auditors of fair trade, and right from Guatemala and Africa to Southeast Asian countries, and we used to exchange notes. And Flo was very receptive as to how we should try and incorporate the cultural elements which are not so alien. And then some of my friends, they out of the peer pressure of the network, there was a new program being initiated in the country with the support of the United Nations, especially Food and Agriculture Organization. And the project was about technical capacity building for the government of India and other state governments. And I was fortunate, a lot of my friends recommended that I should perhaps coordinate this, and I got the assignment as a national coordinator. And I really enjoyed it so much, because what had happened, as I told you, that in around 2000, we were still talking of the same thing, that let's try and bring traditional agriculture more mainstream into organic world. But when you talk of as a civil society, then you don't make the same kind of an impact when you talk of it from an FAO platform. So it was really amazing the way FAO gave us a space. So I brought the same group of friends who were in the network as an advisory body in our program on the FAO platform, and then we were talking to the government, who was a part of our initiative, and that was so wonderfully accepted in some sense. Of course, there are always reservations in the Indian agricultural system. The scientists lobby, means not lobby I should say, but the scientific mindset, and they somehow consider that it is too far-fetched. And especially since we have been through a very deep crisis of food in the recent past. I think it is also not fair to undermine the efforts that the scientists have made to make us a food self-sufficient country. Means, of course, in terms of grains, we are very proud that we are a country which we don't have to import food grains. Means we have shortfall here and there in terms of nutrition security of the people at large, but in terms of at least food safety, we have enough food grains that we are producing, and thanks to the real scientific efforts and the commitment of the government. At the same time, there was need to recognize traditional agriculture, because the whole of the certification side had gone to a very bureaucratic way of certification in organic. And it was interesting that most farmers who were converting to organic were purely driven by the market mechanism. And those who were traditionally into the organic agriculture practices could not afford the certification, and were not literate enough to be able to follow all the guidelines of the certification agencies. So we developed a new system which is called participatory guarantee system, and in 2006 it was initiated under the umbrella of a civil society federation, which was called National Organic Council. And then in 2010 formally Government of India accepted this as a national system, and now in 2014 October it was accepted as a system wherein you can remain in under organic period, and then only when you need to export you need a recertification from another agency. It was a very big thing eventually in 8 years that has come about, and India is considered like a pioneering country in participatory guarantee system in the world today, and many other countries are now following it. So, but what really I felt that, see, all these economic aspects, the ecological aspects are important, but those are not the mere drivers or justification for doing something which is more sustainable and environment friendly. It is the consciousness which has to somehow steer it. And since I had always come from the scientific background, I felt that maybe there were more moral reasons than just the justification side for doing something which is healthier and which is more equitable, uh, which is more justice to the world than just the aggression of our anthropocentric worldview. Okay, now we are suffering from chemicals, so let's do organic. Means that's fine, but I hope I'm able to express what I'm trying to say. So, and then I felt that, okay, if it has to be done something from internal motivation, then one has to study a little bit of psychology, a little bit of philosophy to understand. And I was looking for such courses in India. If you are a science student, you cannot register in arts stream. And then I saw this applied ethics program being conducted at the University of this was a consortium of 3 universities in the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. And I applied for that. And it was a very, very interesting experience for me, and a very deep learning from several points of view. And the whole argumentation style, of course, because it was based in Europe, was in Western philosophical tradition and logic, tradition of logic, which is a bit different from the Oriental and Eastern worldviews. But since we are majority and all our education is geared by those value systems, I think it was very useful for me to look at it from their point of view. And there I came across a sentence which I think changed the course, the way I looked at things. And it was, we should not conserve nature because of the sense of duty. We should conserve nature for its beauty. And I had somehow never looked at it from that context. And then this whole thing about beauty led me to understand more about the aesthetic theories, and there is a whole lot of aesthetic theories. In that, studying about those aesthetic theories, and especially the integrated aesthetic theory, one gets the references from the work of Immanuel Kant. And that is to do about disinterestedness. So that if I have to somehow connect with either it's an object of art or anything, then I have to transcend this barrier of thinking, analytical mind. Because only then I can really get that subtle feeling of, otherwise it's very judgmental, okay, this is fine and that's fine, and it is in this form and that form. And so this disinterestedness, I tried to study a little bit more from the work of Goyer, who has elaborated it further. And I tried to create a workshop on this whole idea of how to sit with nature, how to connect with nature. And my thesis was titled as Experiencing Nature Aesthetically, a Means and an End. And I quoted Rabindranath Tagore because then I found that, okay, it's not only in the West, it's also in the East. And he uses words like that the water does not only cleanse my limbs, it cleanses my soul. So that's something I think you cannot do it with an analytical mind. You have to cross that barrier. And what was even more beautiful, that it was not so esoteric in the sense, not mystic, because psychologists, and especially Frida, his work is used so much in the advertising world today. He talks of affect infusion mechanism, and he talks of permanent marks on our memory system, and he talks of the emotions in the steering of our actions. And all of that is not coming through analytical mind. It's affecting us very deeply in some unconscious ways, and that is generating feelings, and because of those feelings we are in action towards certain things. So armed with that, the workshop had some scientific basis, some philosophy, and we started to offer it when I returned, and I was living in my village. I moved to this village, and we worked on it. Howsoever, it was often a little bit difficult to convey it to the scientific world, although we did some workshops with the mainstream. But it remained like a peripheral, more like a relaxation activity than something more substantive than that. So I came to know about this Fulbright Environment Leadership Award, and I applied for it, and I got through the idea of contemplation of nature. And it was very interesting because there were 18 people from scientific institutions on the interview board. And none of them could really relate to this, because either you work on pollution, or you work on ecosystem science, or you work on some species rehabilitation, or you work on restoration. Means you do something which is proper. What is this contemplation of nature about? So what was then? So I was having a little bit of a difficulty because the time is limited. They have hundreds of people to be interviewed, and so you have very little time. And then I saw that the room that we were sitting in had curtains all over, and we were having almost 20 tube lights in that room. Now in Delhi, where this was happening, the one wall had so much of light coming from outside but blocked by curtains. So I woke up, I got up from my seat, I opened the curtains and I switched off the light. And I asked them, if 20 of us cannot even see this, that it's a wasteful use of environmental resources, then there is certainly something lacking in our education. And I think that message got across despite anything else that I had written in the proposal. And I got through, and so I established contacts in US with some host institutions. You need a host, and fortunately I was accepted because I went through the Association for Contemplative Mind in US, and they advised me about certain of their members who are working in it, and I landed up in UW Seattle. There it was when I started to look at the work that is happening in US on the scientific side of contemplation and the mindfulness. It's amazing. It's so much of science is happening. So I think it is a deep sea where I think I could just sit on the shores and a little bit understand in those 4 months that I spent there. But I could bring in the elements of that modern research into our workshop, and further our contemplation of nature workshop got strengthened. Having said that, I think we have always maintained this right from the day one when we started this workshop, that without the practice we will not offer any workshop. So we are not talking only 35 minutes of practice. If people don't have the time, we are saying we can't offer the workshop. So we have not had any single workshop. I think so far we have done close to 400 without the practice session, because otherwise it makes very little sense to people just learning and cognitively and seeing things.
Can you say a few words on the practice part so that people can just have an idea of what you're talking about when you say that you balance both in your approach?
See, the practice, the fundamentals of practice are in three principles. And one is that we are sitting with any natural object. It can be indoors, outdoors, a huge thing like the whole sky, or a very small object of nature, or anything that you feel you can relate to or you have access to. And just being with it with a very soft gaze. So it's like an open eyes, half open eyes. Having sat with, and one has to sit really comfortably because one is going to sit for 35 minutes. And you can sit in any posture, there is no recitations involved, it is just a very secular practice steeped in only the environment. Then the second step is disinterestedness, as I mentioned to you. The disinterestedness is about not thinking proactively about that particular object with which you are contemplating or anything else, because the thoughts will come and go. It is easier to say than actually practice. But we would just try and bring our attention back to the contemplative side and just be with the object. Whenever we remember, sometimes you don't even realize that the thoughts have taken you somewhere else. So as soon as you realize, you bring it back. Then the third thing is sympathetic attention, and that's coming from the power of positive emotions. And that is that only once when we begin, we express gratitude in our heart for the nature, because we are beings of nature and it's the elements of nature because of which we are alive. And we just have to express gratitude once. We don't have to really create essays or something. It's a positive feeling. In a more classical sense, you can say that the step number 2 is a more transcendental step, because we are quietening the mind and trying to connect more deeply. And so this is the practice. And what I learned, the duration for the practice, which we have kept as 35 minutes, we divided into actually 3 parts. So we say 30 minutes and then we make an indication that 30 minutes are over, and then we expect everybody to remain there for another 3 minutes, because it's not so easy to come out of that deeper tranquility if you have been able to reach it. And then another indication at 33rd minute, and then on the 35th minute another indication, then people can join together for a discussion. And often our workshops have very little introduction, just maybe 5-10 minutes to explain the practice, and the whole of the science is after the whole of the discussion is after the practice session. That's how it is carried out.
And what has your experience been? Because you have been conducting all kinds of seminars, workshops in your previous work also. So what kind of difference, or was there difference or not, could you see in establishing this practice before starting to talk about the science? Was there some difference that you could observe?
Yeah, see, I think that what's happening in many seminars, the regular ones, is that we are only trying to express our viewpoints, and we are not so sure whether the other person is really with you or not. And in this one, once they have practiced, And it's amazing how much power nature has. I mean, in 99% of the participants, they calm down to a level of tranquility where even without saying so much, you start to at least feel the power of the nature. So once you have felt it, then it is only a matter of giving some input, theoretical input, as to the expanding the science of it. So even if that input wasn't there, and this was just practiced as a ritual, it would still be as beneficial. But not to make it a ritual, but to have the substance is the theoretical portion that we feel is important.
Well, there's an interesting thing for me, that you mentioned right now, and which refers back to some other little things that you said before. What you're saying is in a certain way that the nature also calms down the mind and makes people able to listen, basically, because very often we talk but we don't really listen so much. And you know that this is one of my major concerns, this thing like of dialogue and listening. And you said before, also in the institutional world, the problem that sometimes you have like one paradigm, maybe a more Western paradigm, which is there or scientific, and that because of this we may not even hear that there's other ways of, let's say, doing organic, or that there's different ways, different world views are there. And then that we don't even open up to the dialogue of our object of study, like if it's environment and we just saw the use but not the beauty of it, as you were mentioning. So that the water is not only, to cleanse yourself, but like your body, but has also other dimensions. And so my question to you would be, so this is a very, very personally interested question, is, that for me, like the path of dialogue involves at least like 4 dimensions, and 4 dimensions of listening, which is on the one hand like to listen to oneself, to listen to others. And when I say listening, is an active listening, which also involves dialogue, because you ask something, you get some feedback, so it's not only like an introspection or something like this, it's an active dialogue. Then the environment, listening and dialoguing with the environment, and beyond. So that is a little like the 4 aspects. And actually you have pointed to all of them in the different things that you mentioned. So, and I underline, it's a very like personal question, just because I'm so interested in dialogue. What is in your eyes like maybe the potential or the seed that you have in this contemplation of nature as such? You mentioned to me once that for many people also trying to get insight is very difficult. But by very naturally being in nature already, it helps, as you were expressing now, to just to calm down. So what do you see maybe as a potential for sustaining or evoking or opening up to an inspiration of listening and dialogue in contact with nature? That's the first question. And the second one would be like also on the practical. Now, practical in the sense of what science or economics considers as being practical. So in coming back to your first part of your journey, what do you think this could then or could not have as an impact in ways of designing, I don't know, policies or approaches or certification processes? Or big question, huh?
Yeah, and I have not so much thought so much about the dialogue, but now your question prompts me to ponder over it. Because the more the predominant thought has been about silence, and I think they are the two sides of the same thing. Perhaps maybe you would understand it better, but if I am more silent and more peaceful, then I think my comprehension of listening and understanding is improving in the same way. It is, and that I would refer to as being very significant way of actively listening, and not just listening for the sake of polite conversation, but but also actively trying to comprehend and comprehend it in a very wholesome way. Often we think that intellectual discourse is one thing, our private leisure time is one thing, and sometimes even my dreams are even another thing. And this whole thing creates a bit of a disintegration, and we try to take up roles, or even more than that perhaps sometimes, in expectations of others. So if I'm in a scientific discourse perhaps, then I am trying to not say, even if I feel something strongly about it, if I feel that it is not appropriate. And that, I think, that's where the barriers of active comprehension and listening can come about, because then you may be saying certain things which I really don't perhaps believe in or understand fully, and I'm sometimes even afraid to question and ask. So I think if we were to take it a little bit back as children, our curiosity about everything is because we are not so much engaging the mind very actively before asking a question, but it is coming more spontaneously perhaps, because my whole being is engaged. But as I grow up, I sit in a chair in a nice conference hall, then my whole being is perhaps not engaged, as I told already, that there's disintegration. And what we feel is the step of naturalness orientation, which I think is very significant, is that the liberty of mutual respect, that you may be and I may be, and we should be able to communicate and have a dialogue, which is not just hearsay or what I feel is appropriate at the moment, but it should be coming from somewhere deeper, where I'm really curious about it. And I think this whole thing of real curiosity, being able to express myself more transparently, and not only trying to create a kind of a hyper situation like in another plane, which is not feasible for me, but I have expectations versus what is my reality. And I think if we start to be more grounded, both in our feelings, in our actions, in our being, then I think I am becoming a better listener, and I can have a more meaningful dialogue instead of just dialogue for the purpose of having a dialogue or a conference or a meeting. And that's where I think this thing of integrity of thought and action gets so deep by practicing, by being tranquil, and having that level of confidence, that of spontaneity. And spontaneity in a very positive way is coming from that wisdom, which is not just knowledge gathered, but it is from my whole being. And I'm trying to live that path, and I'm trying to be on that, and I'm really there with you at that moment because I wanted to be there. It is not just that I have to be seen in that conference that I am there. I think all that is a big departure. It's not just a subtle departure. And what we have felt, because we have been able to do some of the side events in very major conferences, for example, CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, which was held in Hyderabad in India, where 100 participants from 160 countries were there, and we got an opportunity to create a side event. Now, of course, considering the security arrangements and this and that, it was not possible to find any natural elements in that conference venue, and we could not bring pots with earth and in it, because they had to be screened through X-ray. So we collected a whole lot of garlands, that were there from the nearby temple, of the conference menu, and we took the garlands to be able to contemplate, and we offered the garlands to people to contemplate nature. And despite the background noise, the preoccupied minds of negotiations and this thing at stake and so much, people still felt very tranquil at the end of the session. And this is really which gave us a lot of strength that maybe we should make the new conferences and workshops that we do a little bit more contemplative. And otherwise, often there is no space. You start at 8:30 in the morning and you finish at 6:30 with 3 sessions in a row. And I really don't know if you are able to gather that much in terms of your being. And that's where in the US I saw that this whole thing of contemplative education is coming about. They have a whole society. It's called Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. And they are teaching these things, and then the professors are learning these things, and in their university lessons and academic classes they are practicing contemplation, and in every subject they are trying to weave in the contemplative ways. Is because we have to be mindfully there where we are, and not just in terms of from our analytical side, but from my being I should be there. And I think that's a big difference that on the more that I see and I feel about. I don't know if I've been able to answer the first. And the second one on a more practical side, which I think is a bridge which we have already reached in this conversation, is that just last November, I was fortunate to be able to participate in the World Parks Congress because the theme was nature and healthy nature, healthy people. And it started with a message from the Director General of the World Health Organization, and the whole IUCN had organized it with a whole lot of nature conservation professionals involved. And there is substantive scientific evidence being brought up at the moment in how nature affects us physically, physiologically, and in a psychic way, and the positive effects of it. With that, the town planning is gradually changing, and as I told you that I studied in the Netherlands, and there I learned that the Dutch Council of Health has already given recommendations and guidelines as to when you make a hospital, then better than the 4 blank white walls, if you have a little window to the outside. And so if you can plan a little courtyard in the hospital so that the more rooms are looking outside to the nature or to somewhere. Similarly in schools, if you look at the classical school buildings in India and the hospitals, they are just plain white walls. And if there is any element of nature, and if a student, suppose there was a window in my time, then if I was looking outside, then my teacher will pay attention to me, what I am saying. But what the teacher, she or he is unable to comprehend is that if I am getting more absorbed in there, then I am actually getting much more. It is not that if I'm thinking of something else and looking outside the window, then certainly I'm lost case. And the teacher certainly should reprimand me. But this little distraction of looking at the nature and being in the classroom is very helpful. It is being proved by that the cognitive capacities of the people increase, the level of concentration increases, the interrelationships, personal relationships improve. In Japan, there used to be this culture which is called Shinrin Yoko. The Shinrin Yoko literally means forest bathing, bathing in the forest. So even in the corporate organizations, wherever, even the busy urban areas, they will try to create some miniature gardens where people can go, contemplate nature, and return. And that half an hour is in turn proves more productive to the organization than thinking that the employee has not logged in and wasted that half an hour. It's now when the science starts to do these things, and I don't want to once again overestimate the scientific endeavor, just like I didn't want to underestimate the scientific endeavor in the cause of agriculture, is that now they are saying, okay, if you want to be, if 1 hour of or half an hour of Shinrin Yoko, it keeps you good for 24 hours. I think what they are also calculating is half a day of outing keeps you good for 3 days. 1 day of outing keeps you good for a week. So now that's, I think, a bit too, again, trying to become very regimental. The two things in this practical way when we are going forward, I think we need to consider. One is that in the name of nature, recreation, nature tourism, we often have created more expenditure in terms of infrastructure, more energy intensity, people traveling far and wide, and all the kind of comforts that we are used to be created in natural settings. And that's the path we feel in Foundation for Nature Contemplation is perhaps we need to be a little more conservative about. We maybe perhaps start to love everyday nature. Fine, I should go to a tiger reserve to sightsee, fine. But I should be very sensitive to my ecological footprint that I am going to create there. Or to any other area, maybe mountain climbing. Of course I need the gear to be able to do that. But with more an attitude of surrender to the mountain than an attitude of victory over the mountain. And with that I'll be more sympathetic to my own journey, more reflective in my journey. So that's one thing that we feel is very significant, that instead of trying to make another enterprise out of contemplation of nature, we wanted to make more as a mental approach and an attitude about nature.
What did you learn in your, let's say, encounters or dialogues with the different communities that you were working in, like in your different projects that you were having? Because you didn't want, you said, like to just spend time with the bureaucrats, but you wanted to be able to spend time, as we'd say, like in the field. And so you interacted a lot also with different kind of communities, and you saw their way of approaching nature, like the positive parts, the problems that came with it. And so which is not only, like I would say, because we talked a lot about, let's call it more Western or modern science kind of approaches. So which is not only like maybe a more Indian perspective on things, but also very practically rooted experience and knowledge, because it's not about what you learned in the books, but how do you actually relate, like when you're a small farmer or a farmer community. So what did you learn from that side, and how did that like influence you or inspire you for your path of contemplation of nature?
Yeah, it's a very beautiful way of asking something that you have touched upon. Initially, when I saw a lot of reverence about nature, a lot of traditions of sacred nature, and how people culturally give so much of significance to elements of nature, I always looked at it from a very limited context of, okay, this is a very practical way of conservation. Because if people think it is sacred, then they will conserve it. Oh, wow, it's a very good thing. But gradually, I think after this journey of trying to understand about contemplation, and I have an entirely different worldview on this. And I think it creates a rhythm of life in harmony with nature. When we have festivals around nature, We work with the clock of nature, we work with the seasons of nature, we have different activities with elements of nature, the way we utilize them, we have reciprocity kind of a thing with nature. We want to see that the equilibrium is not so much disturbed. It creates a very harmonious rhythmic relationship with nature, not only with nature outside but one's internal nature. It's not as if I'm going in a car and I'm putting accelerator and a brake all the time. Then I'm going with my own pace. And I'm trying to imbibe with the pace of others. And that is, I think, a very beautiful side of looking at a very non-aggression and life. And when we develop technology, then we think of the appropriate technologies which is not disturbing so many elements, because see, there is a pursuit of happiness. Means even now if you just read the face of the people, suppose you were if I go to Delhi and see in metro the people who are traveling, and if you see maybe 500 people traveling in that metro, maybe you will find 10 smiling faces or maybe 50. Whereas they have all the comforts, they are traveling well, they have jobs, there's everything going. Or even in organizations, if you go, which are they are very well paid and taken care of. As compared to someone, you go to the forest, some communities who are having a very hard life, means to take the cow to the forest and this and that, and you have to carry the firewood, you have to do the fodder and cook and this and that. Out of 500 people, if you sample, and if you have a conversation or a dialogue, at least 50% or more will end up in smiles. So this was my experience even then, because we used to work with rural communities, very hard pressed and poor, sometimes impoverished. But that pace of life and that rhythm, I think, had a self-assured kind of a feeling in the heart of hearts. And there was a more at a plain level of conversation. So if I go and have a conversation, maybe she would not immediately start to think, what do I want to hear, or what is it that she expects from me, and then make a response. Whereas even in the metro, if I ask, then it will be a big question mark. Maybe if I ask this question out of 500 people, only 50 or less will even want to answer, which will not be the case in the real life, in the practical communities. So I think that this friendliness was also reducing a lot. Trustworthiness, friendliness. Now these are not some things you can measure, but it makes a big difference. So those are the things I think now when I look back, I say, yeah, they were so friendly. They were so caring in a way to me. I did almost, what did I do? Maybe some project work, this, that, maybe some study reports, maybe working with them in the field sometimes to take observations for science, or maybe raising a little resources for their self-help group. But whatever it was, they were never kind of suspicious, if I may use that word, or they were not, means of course things are changing, but I am talking of that time, that it is still, people have more simpler ways of looking at the world.
So in a certain way, like one could say that like linking this contemplation of nature is like with this environmental ethics, that kind of put you on that path like very explicitly. That also like the contemplation of nature, being in touch with nature, in a certain way would also be a way to either rediscover or not lose our humanity, in the sense of keeping like this maybe more gentleness or kindness or openness towards things.
Certainly. See, the one thing with the problem of ethics is sometimes it's also like a discourse. So I may be going to a service every Sunday, or I may be going to a temple every morning or whatever, and then hear some discourse, and then I come back and do whatever. Has that discourse transformed me from inside? Has it sinked in? I think that's where we need to question. And that's where the power of contemplation is. Because it sinks in, it goes very deep without even knowing.
So time is little by little, unfortunately, moving very, very fast. So maybe two last questions. So the one would be, so now the foundation is there. It has started to do something. So how do you see its horizon, like for the next maybe 10 years? Like, what would you like to achieve in the sense of let unfold, let's put it like this. And then the second thing, more general, which may be a way maybe of like concluding and opening up for other horizon. If you had to give not an advice, but maybe share like most important thing, like in a few lines, like for other people, like-minded people, who may be inspired by this idea, what would you like to share with them as a concluding thought?
I think in terms of unfolding, I see three paths. One is the path of kind of a mainstreaming, which is in the sense that if we could put this into the curriculum, into the training of existing programs. For example, just last February, we were very fortunate to do 2-day workshops with the protected area managers, and that was being done by the Wildlife Institute of India training program. That kind of a thing certainly is something where you can put it into the more formal training programs, people start to appreciate, and it was supported by the German Development Corporation, so that means that there is some recognition of this at all the three levels, at the level of the implementing organization in the government, at the level of the people who are technically supporting the program. So that is one area which I feel is path. The second path is people in their daily lives, because not everybody, but the path of meditation is being fast getting recognized for healthy living and wellness. And sometimes meditation pathways in terms of approaches are so deep that for a beginner it becomes extremely difficult to be able to experience something in the beginning. And by then, if you don't have the motivation to sustain, even without experiencing, then it's very difficult, and that's why most people can't sustain. This we feel contemplation of nature is a doorway, is a gateway to which opens you up because you can feel it. And once you have to feel it, you can feel it, then you can go to deeper states, or many more doors are open for you, for which we have all the methods from ancient knowledge. So that's second, I think. And the third one, I think, is that people would not only think of contemplation of nature as a mere peacefulness, but deep connect with themselves and with the nature will motivate them to come out of the comfort zone and do something. That's the action which I think is very critical in this way. And for that action to take place, there is a threshold of internal motivation and a kind of crossover from the analytical mind to more feelings. And if people can do that, then I think we are moving towards a little bit towards sustainability. Because otherwise, if we only have a discourse and we have very little action, and the actions are more ceremonial, like, okay, I don't use this particular chemical because it's polluting, and I don't do this and I don't do that. I think somehow scientists are saying that that's not enough. We need a radical shift. And that radical shift cannot come about by preaching or by making laws and rules. I think it can only come about through internal motivation of trying to live a more simpler but a richer life and a happier one. And that's what I think is the third pathway. Now about your question of the horizon, in the sense of I really don't know, because it's also a learning for me, and as we move on, we evolve, we learn from each other. My dream, if it was not something but just a dream would be that if we could start to feel ourselves, our own being, and we could have a respect for other beings, which are not just human beings. I think, and if we can see the power of positive emotions, means even a dog, it gives such a strong message of unconditional love, even unconsciously. And so I think if we can see this in our environment, in our immediate environment, then I think that will be my dream. And not just think of faraway beautiful places that only that has nature and that can be connected with. I think it's the everyday thing, and every other human being is a part of nature. Every other creature is a part of nature. Means I don't mean to say that I'll stop living if I'm only thinking about others, but what I mean to say is that I'll start to live, because everybody will start to think about me as well. And that's what I think is a more just society. And we are capable. We are intelligent people. We have such a beautiful earth. We still have a lot of nature around. And we have a lot of tradition still which is around. Means ours is the generation, Christoph, you and I, you and me. We have seen the transition. Means we are very fortunate that we have seen the old also. So it's only a matter of 30-40 years that there is a bit of a mismatch. So it's in terms of the humanity, it's very little. And thanks to all the science, we have enough technology. Just that if our minds were at a proper direction, then I think and the direction that I just outlined about mutual respect and dignity, I think then we are set. And that's a kind of a dream, and because I have no pathways which can lead to it.
So thank you very much, Ajay. It was really beautiful and inspiring to listen to you. And maybe we should also say a word of thanks for this beautiful environment, which welcomed us for sharing together. And so maybe we can just conclude by just sitting a little silently and listen to the nice concerts that we have around us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christoph.